On this week's Fanco Wrestling Show, it's the ultimate guide to the 2020 season. We're talking about dream matchups, bold predictions for this season, and the state of the team race. Who is going to win this year? Plus, stick around if you want to find out who Fanco Wrestling fans, who you want to win the NCAA tournament. So let's stop stalling and start talking wrestling. What's going on, wrestling fans? My name's Josiah, and welcome to the Fanco Wrestling Show. On this show, we talk all about wrestling news, and it is such an exciting week because it's just about time for the NCAA Wrestling Season 2 start. So, on this week, we have a lot to dive into, plus make sure that you stick around. At the end of the show, we'll be talking all about live questions. I'll be taking your live questions all about this upcoming season. So first off, without further ado, let's talk about the world of wrestling. What's happened in the world of wrestling? This is just wrestling topics that aren't necessarily main topics, but they deserve to be talked about. So the first thing here is Dayton Fix. Dayton Fix, of course, is now taking his official Olympic redshirt year this season. This is a major story coming out of the Cowboys Ride for Free blog. Of course, you can find all links to stories in the description below. So Dayton Fix, last year was his redshirt freshman year. Next year this year he's taking his Olympic redshirt as a sophomore. He had a phenomenal season last year, 34-2, with a loss in the NCAA finals to Nick Suriano. Earlier season loss to Mickey Philippi of Pitt. But he had a very amazing offseason in the World Championships whenever he made the world team. He beat Thomas Gilman at Final X and made the team at 57 kilos. And that ended up making him want to take that Olympic redshirt year, and this is something that was kind of expected. I think a lot of people kind of assumed that he was going to take that Olympic redshirt year, but now it's just official, confirmed by John Smith, head coach at Oklahoma State. Now, unfortunately, he did not place in the World Championships in Nur Sultan, but he's looking for that Olympic medal next year, and now that he has a little bit more experience under his belt, of course, he's wrestled junior cadet tournaments in the past, but now that he has some more experience, he can, I think he has a good shot of placing next year. Now, he will wrestle in-state college on April 4th and 5th at the Olympic trials. Next up in the world of wrestling is a interesting topic talking about the record year for Big Ten wrestling coverage. So if you're a Big Ten wrestling fan, whether it's Penn State, Iowa, Wisconsin, whoever you're a big fan of, there's a major increase in coverage this year. This story is coming out of Intermat Wrestling, and there's going to be a 40% increase in coverage this year for Big Ten wrestling matches. This is huge because the Big Ten will carry nearly 100 matches this year, including some of the big matches such as Penn State versus Iowa, Penn State versus Ohio State, Iowa versus Oklahoma State, which last year was only on Flow Wrestling. Now it will be broadcast live on the Big Ten Network, as well as Ohio State versus Iowa, Ohio State versus Wisconsin, and so many more. You can watch these matches live via the Fox Sports app. Now, this leads into another interesting topic, talking about the streaming wars between Big Ten Network, ESPN Plus, which is now major now that the Disney streaming service is coming out and they can bundle that all together. Now, please let me know, where are you going to watch these matches? I tend to watch on Big Ten if I'm not attending the match, but I wish that ESPN Plus would carry a few more matches because it's just, right now, there aren't too many matches that they are covering. Now, let's get into today's first topic. What are the dream matchups that could happen this year? Let's talk about that. So, the stats that I'm going to mention are by WrestleStat. Make sure you check out WrestleStat, which is a great news site to check all your statistics on wrestling. Now, talking about dream matchups, so we're going to go weight by weight, talking about which dream matchups we could see this year. So, at 125 pounds, the first dream matchup that I want to mention is Jack Mueller versus Nick Piccinini. And the first thing I'm going to mention is I'm not just talking about all 1 versus 2 guys. I'm talking about some guys that are number 3 versus number 4, number 5, whatever it is. It's not just all number 1 and 2. Because, of course, everybody wants to see number 1 and number 2. And I'll get to a couple of those. But first up, Jack Mueller versus Nick Piccinini. Mueller's number 2. Piccinini's number 4 right now. Mueller out of Virginia last year had a outstanding season, was undefeated going into the national tournament, into the national finals, actually, whenever he ended up being defeated by Spencer Lee. Now, what's interesting here is Piccinini, of course, has a win last season on Spencer Lee earlier in the season against a duel. Now, these two have not wrestled before, but they do have many common opponents. One of those, of course, being Spencer Lee. They will wrestle next, probably not until a national tournament. Who do I predict is going to win? I have to say, I think this is the year for Nick Piccinini. I think he's going to have a phenomenal season, and I'm interested to see what he does. And as I'm going through all these, please let me know what your dream matchups would be. Now, at 133 pounds, an interesting matchup here would be Seth Gross versus Mickey Phillippi. Now, why Mickey Phillippi out of all guys? Why is this a number 1 versus number 4 matchup? Why I think this would be a great matchup, because these two haven't wrestled in the past, is these two have some pretty funky styles. I think they would kind of combat well against each other, and I'm interested in seeing what that, Wisconsin versus Pitt would be. Now, they have not wrestled before, like I said, but Gross is 16-0 against all of Mickey Phillippi's common opponents. Now, we don't know when they'll wrestle next, because Wisconsin is going to Midlands, Pitt's going to the Scuffle. They could meet at the national tournament, depending on where they fall in the bracket. That's probably where we'll see them next. Who do I think is going to win? I think Gross is going to win with that year off and kind of with some time to readjust and get some more training in. I think Gross is going to be the superior opponent here, but like I said, both funky styles, and we've seen Mickey Phillippi knock off top guys before, like Dayton Fix last season. At 141 pounds, number 2 Nick Lee versus number 3 Luke Pletcher. If you haven't heard yet, Luke Pletcher is bumping up a weight to wrestle 141 pounds. This is relatively new news and something that I thought was very important to discuss. So Nick Lee versus Luke Pletcher. What could this match look like? We've seen some great matches between Penn State and Ohio State in the past, and that's probably when they're going to meet first, is in this duel between Penn State and Ohio State in February. Now, we've seen Nick Lee knock off last year Joey McKenna, who ended up making the national finals, but we've seen him knock him off in the duel, and I think that could happen again this year. I don't know what's going to happen in this match, but my prediction is that because Nick Lee is coming in hot this season, he had a great season last year and can, really showed up against opponents in duels. I think that Nick Lee is going to win, but I'll tell you what, Pletcher is stacked, he's jammed, and he can always keep any type of match close, and Nick Lee tends to have a lot of close matches as well. Now, at 9 pounds, who is a dream matchup here? Let's call this the battle of the freshmen, because we have Brayton Lee versus Sammy Sasso. This is number 11, Brayton Lee out of Minnesota versus number 5, Sammy Sasso out of Ohio State. Sasso is a guy right now who there's a lot of chatter talking about Sasso becoming a national champion in his freshman year. Is it possible? Let me know. I think it is totally possible that it could happen. Now, these two are one of the first matchups that have actually wrestled in the past before. So they have wrestled in their redshirt year last season, whenever Sammy Sasso had a 6-4 decision over Brayton Lee. That was in their redshirt year. Now, the next time they'll meet is versus Minnesota versus Ohio State. That duel is happening in January. That's probably the first time we're going to see it. Who are we going to see win that? I think Sasso. He edged him out before, and I think that there's a good chance that he's going to edge him out again. Next up, at 157 pounds, we're halfway through these dream matchups in number 1, Hayden Hiley versus number 3, Ryan Deacon. Deacon out of Northwestern, of course, Hiley out of NC State. Hiley is coming in hot this season after a very controversial match in the semifinals last year against Jason Nolf. He's no longer in his way, and we could definitely see Hiley taking that national title, but there are going to be a couple of guys in his way, such as Ryan Deacon. Now, these two have wrestled again in the past. They will be wrestling again, possibly at the Cliff King Las Vegas in December. Last time they wrestled, Hiley won 8-2. That was at the national tournament last year. Now, who's going to win next? I think Hiley is probably going to win next, even though Deacon had a great season last year. He's a great wrestler. 32-7 actually was his record last year, but I see Hayden pulling that victory out at 165. Now, I mentioned, of course, that I have to talk about a couple number ones versus number twos, and I think this is everybody's dream matchup again at 165, is Alex Marinelli versus Vincenzo Joseph. These two have clashed in the past before multiple times. Well, just twice actually, but they have clashed in the past when Marinelli is 2-0 against Vincenzo Joseph. Vincenzo just can't seem to get his hands on Marinelli, can't seem to figure him out his style. This could be the year that he does figure it out. Now, Marinelli is one of the only guys who has beaten Vincenzo Joseph 2 times, the other guy being Isaiah Martinez, of course, a couple of years ago. Now, these two will wrestle next, Iowa versus Penn State. We could see them wrestling multiple times, which I think is very exciting for the wrestling community. We could see them in the duel. We could see them at Big Tens and at Nationals, possibly all in the finals, depending on how their seasons stack out, because we all know that an early season loss could lead to an early matchup at the national tournament. At 174, another controversial duel is, of course, always Penn State versus Iowa. And this year, Mark Hall will be wrestling Michael Kemmer at 174 pounds. Now, what I want to mention as an honorable mention, almost always be a fun dream match would be Mark Hall versus Anthony Valencia, which is most likely going to happen again whenever Penn State versus Arizona State early in the season, but mostly just because Zahid and Mark have had such a big rivalry in the past that I want to see him wrestle his brother. So, Hall versus Kemmer. Now, we see that Kemmer, is bumping up a weight this year, a couple weights actually, from 157 to wrestle 174 after an injury last season. Now, these two have not wrestled in the past because of that, and it's going to be exciting to see how they do. Now, they are both undefeated against common opponents, and there aren't too many because of the weight change, because of that. We'll see them wrestle in January during the duel. My next winner, who I think is going to win, is going to be Mark Hall. Kemmer may have a little bit of trouble bumping up a weight. We'll see how that turns out. Of course, it's a half season under his belt by then, so we'll see how he does. Now, at 184, another guy who's bumping up is Zahid Valencia. Zahid Valencia is, of course, the other guy who's bumping up this year, and he will be wrestling in a dream matchup, Ben Darmstadt out of Cornell. Now, Zahid and Ben could be a very exciting duel. Why? Ben's dropping down, Zahid is bumping up. So we have two guys who are both, Zahid is just stacked. He's jammed. Had an incredible last season, although he did have a couple of losses. Now, Darmstadt, if you're unfamiliar with him, he ended up having to take a year off last year, took a redshirt year. Now, he did All-American at 197 pounds, Darmstadt out of Cornell, but because he's dropping down, that is pretty big and could be a major factor in a duel against the Heat. Now, how do these two stack up? I still see Zahid. I still think he's massive for 184. He's still technical, a very technical wrestler, and I think he has that against Darmstadt. And now, they have not wrestled in the past before. There aren't any common opponents, but they will be wrestling, next at the Cliff Keen Las Vegas if they end up making up those matchups. If they end up wrestling, it could be there. If not, we will probably see them at the national tournament. 2 more weights for you guys. At 197, Colin Moore versus Kyle Connell. This is another Penn State versus Ohio State matchup. Connell, of course, coming out of Kent State, transferred to Penn State this year. They have wrestled in the past. They wrestled in Cleveland at the national tournament. Now, when they wrestled then, it was just kind of like Connell was just another guy that Colin Moore was just supposed to pretty much put the hammer down, crush him. But Connell came out of nowhere and stuck Colin Moore. It was the biggest match of the tournament, I think, by far. It was the most exciting match. But not only did he pin him then, they ended up wrestling in the wrestlebacks whenever Colin Moore lost again to Kyle Connell, lost a close match. Their last match was 5-3. Now, we could see them wrestle again, Penn State versus Ohio State. Who do I think is going to win next? That's a tough one. I think Connell has just a couple more opponents in the room who he's now training with. Of course, he has great practice partners now, and Anthony Cassar, Bo Nickel in the room. He'll have Kyle Snyder, who's kind of snuck away from Colin Moore. So I think that puts Connell at a little bit of an advantage, and we've seen that he can beat him in the past. So why can't it happen now that he's transferred to Penn State? At 285 pounds, the big heavyweight matchup that I want to see. Yes, of course, I want to see Anthony Cassar versus Gable Steveson. That is a massive match, but that's not my dream match. My dream match is number 9, Anthony Cassiope versus number 11, Mason Paris. Why? I feel like these are two of the biggest heavyweights that are talked about, possibly even more than Cassar and Stevenson going into this season, because people just want to see how they do. Of course, Mason Paris very well at international success, as well as Cassiope, they both have. Now, these two have not wrestled in college yet, but they have met at the national championships, cadet junior national championships, whenever Cassiope teched Mason Paris. Could that happen again? We'll see in the duel with Iowa versus Michigan. Now, I think that Cassiope is going to win that, being an Iowa wrestler. I think that, showing that he teched him before is very possible. Of course, now that we're going to wrestle in freestyle, we'll see what happens. And that's my dream matchups for this upcoming season. Now, who are some wrestlers that are looking for revenge? Let's talk about who are the wrestlers looking for revenge this season. There are 5 wrestlers that I want to talk about that are going to look for revenge this season because of a loss from last year, from 2018-2019 season. Now, I want to mention that all these matches I'm going to talk about, I will have linked below in the description so you can watch them all. They're all linked up so you can watch them, and they're very exciting matches to watch. So, who are my dream matchups? The first matchup that I want to discuss is at 125 pounds, Spencer Lee versus Sebastian Rivera. Of course, Spencer Lee will be seeking revenge on Sebastian Rivera. Now, yes, Spencer Lee did win the national tournament last year. However, he had 2 losses to Seabass out of Northwestern. The last time they wrestled was not at the national championship. However, it was at the Big Ten finals. These two went into a sudden victory match. Who is going to win next? I think that Lee pulls off the victory. Their next meeting will probably be at Midland in December. We've seen a couple of close matches. Of course, that last match at Big Ten finals was a little bit unfortunate because of a hands to the face call, a close takedown in OT, and it kind of went either way. I don't think that Seabass is going to give up without a fight, and I think it's very possible that Seabass actually wins the next time they meet, possibly at Midlands, like he beat him last year. However, that's just my prediction for what's going to happen at the next match. The next guy seeking revenge, Nick Lee. Nick Lee is seeking revenge on Dom Demas. The last time these two wrestled was at the national championship whenever Dom won 13-9. Now, their next meeting is probably not going to be until nationals because there aren't any common tournaments, aren't any duels that these two are wrestling, Oklahoma versus Penn State. Now, these two, Demas, of course, he's a pretty strong upper body wrestler. He likes to kind of go over with those hooks. He's a strong wrestler. He likes a lot of throws. That's kind of what we saw happen in last year's match. Now, we did see Lee kind of battle back after getting tossed early on, and Lee has been known to battle back from victories. I'd like to see Nick Lee win, but I'm a big fan of Demas too, so we'll see what happens there. Next up, talking at 149 pounds, the guy looking for revenge here, Brock Mahler on Austin O'Connor. The reason that these number 1, number 2 guys right now, O'Connor, of course, out of UNC, is the number 1 ranked guy at 149 pounds. The reason that he's number 1 right now is because he has a win over Mahler last year at the national tournament. However close it was a 4-3 victory that O'Connor had on Mahler, and we'll see, we'll see if we end up getting this matchup or not. Early on in the season, we're going to see number 3 and Deegan wrestle number 2 Mahler. That's actually actually the last duel of the season that these two are going to wrestle. So we could see them going into a national finals situation where, these two maybe meet up somewhere early on, depending on where they're ranked. Because otherwise, these two won't meet up until nationals because they're both in separate conferences, of course, MAC and the ACC. Next up on my radar, who is a guy looking for revenge, Vincenzo Joseph. Of course, Vincenzo Joseph is looking for revenge on Alex Marinelli, and he's not just looking for 1 year's worth of revenge, he's looking for 2 years worth of revenge because Marinelli beat him in a duel 2 years ago, beat him in the Big Ten finals last year. And this is a guy just always seems to edge out Vincenzo, and he just kind of knows his style, knows what he's going to do. We saw Vincenzo kind of go upper body with him, just can't quite get that against Marinelli, so he tried taking a couple shots we saw at the national tournament, a little bit different, various style. Last time they wrestled, Marinelli won 9-3, so it was a pretty big victory there. And before that, it was actually 9-6. That was the score of the match in the duel. Who's going to win next? In the Penn State versus Iowa duel, which is when these two are going to meet up, I think there's a very good chance that Marinelli wins next. Now, I will say, never bet against Vincenzo. We've seen him pull massive victories off in the past, and it's very, very possible that he can pull off a victory again. So, what could we see happen here? 3-time matchup. We could see Big Tens, the duel, and the national tournament. I can't wait to see what happens after these two guys go at it because Vincenzo, of course, is looking for revenge. And the next guy looking for revenge is Gable Steveson. Of course, Steveson is looking for massive revenge against Anthony Cassar. The last time these two wrestled was in the national semifinals, whenever there was a 4-3 victory for Cassar, which is very, very tight. Now, what's interesting is that this was the same exact score when these two wrestled in the Big Ten finals, whenever Anthony Cassar pulled up a massive upset against the undefeated Gable Steveson. And I see that Steveson has another phenomenal season, and we could see what happens when these two wrestle next. These two will be wrestling next, Penn State versus Minnesota in February. That is when this duel will be happening. But we could also see them wrestle at Big Tens, wrestle at the national tournaments. Now, what's exciting last time is Cassar really won on that riding time. Gable, of course, was looking for that stalling, looking a little bit for that hands to the face. That was a big story of last year's nationals. Everybody looking for hands to the face. But, of course, Steveson is looking for revenge. And guess what? I think that there's a very good chance that he is going to get it. Next up, let's talk about 3 bold predictions. What are 3 bold predictions for the 2020 NCAA wrestling season? I'm going to run through this list over my bold predictions. First up, and please leave your predictions in the comments. I want to know what you have to say about this upcoming season. Make something bold. Make something that when you look back and you made that prediction, everybody's going to be like, wow, I can't believe that you made that you were the guy who called that you made that prediction. So the first prediction, all 10 Iowa wrestlers will not only make the national tournament, but they will earn All-American status. All 10 guys. Now, right now, as it stands, there are 7 Iowa wrestlers ranked in placings that are considered All-American. Of course, that's 1 through 8. So Iowa has 7 guys ranked top 8 in the country. Those guys are Spencer Lee, Austin DeSanto, who's now moved up. He's actually number 2 right now because of a couple of the Olympic red shirts. Max Murin, Pat Lugo, Caleb Young, Alex Marinelli, Michael Kemmerer. Those are all guys from 125 all the way up to 174 are ranked 1 through 8. Actually, Murin's number 9, however, they have all these guys in place. So, Jacob Warner's another guy at 197 who's number 7. Now, the couple guys who are not in All-American status, not all, top 8, are Max Murin, who's number 9, Cash Wilkie, number 11, and Anthony Cassiope, who is also number 11 at 285. Now, there have been teams that have had 10 All-Americans in the past, such as national champions from Minnesota, and that was in 2001 that there were 10 All-Americans. Do you think that it's possible that Iowa gets 10 All-Americans? I think Spencer Lee, very good shot that he wins it. DeSanto, now that a couple guys are out of the way, chance that he makes the finals at least. Max Murin, he's just got to put up a couple of wins to get there, to get to that status, and I think it's possible. I think a couple of these guys where Iowa has, in the past couple of years, kind of failed off at the national tournament, a couple of guys just didn't necessarily show where they deserved to be, with a couple of tight losses at the tournament. And then we're going to have to see Wilkie and Cassiope just win a couple of matches. I think Cassiope, of course, is a big headline this season. A lot of guys want to see how the heavyweight does, and I think it's very possible that he does very, very well. Now, the next bold prediction I have is that Vincenzo Joseph will win his first Big Ten title. Vincenzo Joseph will win his first Big Ten title. Of course, the past 3 years he hasn't won, guys. He's lost to Isaiah Martinez twice, as well as Alex Marinelli. Now, of course, in the past, he's placed higher than all of those guys at the national tournament, which is rare. I'm not extremely rare, but rare and pretty exciting. So, Isaiah Martinez, the first year, 2017, lost 8-5. 2018 lost 4-1. For that first year, actually pinned Imar in the national finals. Then last year, tight loss against Marinelli. And Marinelli, of course, placed fourth last year. I think this may be the year where I think Marinelli may edge him out in a duel. We'll see. I think that this is a year for Vincenzo to win his first Big Ten title. And the third bold prediction I have for this upcoming season is that we will see the highest scoring team race in the national tournament of all time. The highest scoring. Okay. So, in 1997, that was the highest scoring team that had over 170 points in Iowa with Dan Gable. And by highest scoring, right now I'm going to talk about the top two teams. Okay, so as far as the top two teams, could we see the top two teams break the all-time scoring record? And right now, as it stands, 1997 was the highest scoring team race under Dan Gable, where he had 5 national champions and 8 All-Americans. The top two scoring teams, we had Iowa and second scoring team scoring 283 points. The number 2 highest scoring team was in 2018 with Penn State and Ohio State scoring 276 points combined. This is combined, guys. 4 champs and 8 All-Americans is what Penn State have. And then the third is under Dan Gable again, dating back to 1991. That 90s era of Iowa Hawkeye wrestling was insane. And those two high-scoring teams scored 265.75 points with 2 champs and 9 All-Americans out of Iowa. Now, what's an interesting stat is that Penn State or Iowa has been in the top 2 of every top 10 scoring years, besides there was 1 year that they weren't in it. And I believe it was Oklahoma State and maybe Minnesota. But this year, why do I think that we could have the highest scoring team rates of all time? Well, not only do we have Ohio State, but we also have Penn State and Iowa, who have some massive hitters. Right now, Iowa in the preseason has 10 guys ranked in the top 11 and 7 guys in the top 8. So we could see a lot of points scored on the board. Now, of course, all these guys are going to have to get some bonus points. Lee, DeSanto, Murin, Young, Marinelli, Kemmer, Cassiope. We got to see all these guys place high. And along with that, we'll see. I think that one of these teams are going to win, Penn State, Ohio State, or Iowa. Just my prediction. And then Penn State, they have 8 guys ranked in the top 6. 8 in the top 6. 8 ranked in All-American placings. They have 3 number 1s right now with a possibility, it's very early, of 5 finalists. Just, again, my bold prediction. With those guys, with Roman Bravo Young, Nick Lee, Brady Berge, Vincenzo, Mark Hall, Kyle Connell, as well as Kassar, we could definitely see a record-setting year for these guys. What do you guys think? Because Ohio State is another team, and I did have Michigan on this list until a lot of their guys decided to take Olympic red shirts, such as Micic, Storr, Massa, and Amin. I think that could have been a potentially record-setting team as well as Ohio State, who right now has 9 guys ranked in the preseason by Flow Wrestling. Now, a couple of teams that I also want to mention are Iowa State and NC State. I think that a combination of all these guys, all these teams coming in here, we could see a record-setting year, possibly breaking 300 points. That's 150 points each for the top two teams. 300 points for the top two teams. What do you think? And before I get into this next topic, I'm going to take a sip of water. What are the exciting out-of-conference duels to watch this season? Of course, we know that Penn State and Ohio State is going to be a great duel. We know that Iowa versus Penn State is going to be a great duel, as well as many, many other duels. But what are the exciting out-of-conference duels that you need to watch this season? I did the homework, so you don't have to. Now, this was inspired by the Open Match Viewer Guide, which I will link to in the description below, so you guys can check that out. Before we get into it, I want to mention a couple of honorable mentions, and I have 5 duels for you guys to watch this season, and that'll be very, very fun to watch. First up is Iowa State. Iowa State versus Iowa, I think, is an exciting out-of-conference duel to watch. Next up is Lehigh versus Penn State. Now, I'm going to get into these duels, talk about kind of where these teams are ranked, some key matchups, as well as when these teams are actually wrestling. First up, one of the first matches of the season is Campbell versus Pitt. This is an exciting out-of-conference duel to watch. Campbell, of course, in the Southern Conference, in the SoCon, Pitt in the ACC. Why is this so exciting? I think this is a duel that is very possible for Campbell to win, and very possible if Campbell wins this, it pushes them up into the upper echelon, breaking that top 25. Right now, they're around like the number 30-ish rank, but I think that if they beat Pitt, which I think there are a lot of great matchups here. A couple of great matchups, such as at 133, Noah Gonchar versus Mickey Philippi. At 141, Cole Matthews versus Josh Heil. All these guys are top ranked, top 25. And then a heavyweight, which is the match I'm most looking forward to, is Demetrius Thomas versus Jerry Hino. Jerry Hino out of Campbell, Thomas, of course, out of Pitt. This duel is happening one of the first few weeks of the season on November 9th. Make sure that you are watching that, because it's going to be a very fun one at Pittsburgh. Next up is Penn State, the number 1 team right now, versus number 5 team, Arizona State. Now, of course, this is an out-of-conference duel because Penn State is Big Ten, Arizona State is Pac-12. This duel is happening, another early season duel, November 22nd. Many key matchups here. First matchup I'm just interested in seeing is Adam Bushella at 133 versus Roman Bravo Young. While I do think Bravo Young is going to end up winning that, I'd just like to see how Bushella is going to come into the season. As well as 141, another similar match with Kleebov versus Nick Lee. I want to see how Kleebov does this season coming into his redshirt freshman year. At 149, Jared Verclaren versus Maruka. These are 2 PA guys who are now going to be wrestling at Arizona State and in the duel. And I'm excited to see how Maruka and Verclaren do against each other, because I think they're very similar wrestlers, but I want to see kind of how they do. At 157, Brady Berge versus Corey Teamer. 65, 2 Whippeal guys in Vincenzo Joseph and Josh Shields, 2 guys who have wrestled many times in the past. And that's always an exciting duel because it's very close. An exciting match, I should say. And Anthony Valencia, who's the Heat Valencia's brother, will be wrestling Mark Hall. And then Rashid versus Valencia at 184. I think that Penn State is going to end up coming out with that match. But looking at the matchups, they're a little bit closer than I would have first thought. The next duel to watch this season is NC State versus Princeton. This is an ACC versus EIWA matchup, the number 13 versus number 15 team, which can be very exciting. This is happening on January 11th with a couple of key matchups in Camacho versus Pat Glory starting at 125, Hayden Hidley versus Quincy Monday at 157. Well, I think Hadley's going to end up with that victory. It'll be interesting to see how Monday does. And then Nick Reenan versus Patrick Bruckey at 197. 2 guys who are definitely national title contenders. That will be the key matchup in that duel. Next up is going to be Missouri at Oklahoma State. Missouri right now is the number 8 ranked team in the country, and Oklahoma State is number 3. Now, this is a MAC versus Big 12 duel, and I have opponents. I have teams from every single conference here, which I think we don't always just want to talk about, the Big Ten, which many wrestling news sites get accused of doing. We want to talk about all these conferences because every team has exciting guys to watch, and every conference has exciting guys to watch. So let's talk about that. So Missouri versus Oklahoma State. This will not be happening until February, but we have a couple of key matchups in Grant Leith versus Caden Gefeller at 141, and then Dalen Wiseman versus Dakota Gear, top-ranked guys at 184. And perhaps one of the biggest duels on this list doesn't happen until February 22nd, noted the Bedlam series in Oklahoma State versus Iowa, number 2 versus number 3 right now. And it's very possible that they stay that way unless they pull off a couple of upsets later in the season. Big 12 versus Big 10 matchup. Now, of course, these two started wrestling in the early 1900s, and they've met over 100 times. So this is going to be no difference in this massive, massive rivalry. They will be wrestling at Carver Hawkeye Arena in Iowa. Massive matchups in Spencer Lee, versus Nick Piccinini. And that, of course, at 125 was a massive match last year whenever Nick Piccinini ended up pulling off a crazy upset and pinning Spencer Lee. We will also see Gefeller versus Max Murin at 141 and Michael Kemmer versus Smith at 174. JoJo Smith, great matches to watch. Of course, anything can happen in a duel like that, and I'm excited to see what does happen in these exciting out-of-conferences duels that you need to watch this season. Next up, I'm going to talk about if you give me a second here, I'm going to talk about the out of conference, let's talk about the conference team champion predictions. Conference team champion predictions. Who are going to be some exciting teams to watch this year as we head into the conference championship season? Well, first up, talking about the ACC. So, of course, we want to talk about each one of these conferences. We have ACC, Big 12, Big 10, EIWA, MAC, Pac-12, and SoCon. Those are the wrestling conferences this year. Of course, we saw EWL merge with the MAC this year, which made that conference massive, massive, massive. So let's run down this list and talk about the teams that are going to win it this year, potentially. First up is the ACC. Now, last year, NC State won the ACC. Who's going to be in the hunt this year? Of course, NC State, I think, is going to be in the hunt again right now. We could also see Pitt and Virginia Tech. Each of these guys have over 7 ranked guys in the top 25 right now by Flow Wrestling. Now, what's interesting about the ACC is that either NC State or Virginia Tech has won it since 2016, so no other team has won it. We could see Pitt sneak in there this year. Very real possibility that Pitt sneaks in there and wins it. But my prediction is that NC State is going to continue that reign with a couple of tough guys, the Hiley brothers in there. I think they're really going to pull that team to victory. At Big 12s, who's going to win the Big 12s? Last year we saw Oklahoma State won, and they've won the last 7 titles is Oklahoma State. Now, the last team to win it was Mizzou in 2012, but of course they are no longer a part of that conference. And before that, it was actually Nebraska and Iowa State, that actually happened in 2009. We will see Iowa State on the hunt again this year with guys like Gomez, Deegan, and a newly David Carr. We could also see Wyoming come in there with Montori Bridges, of course, leading that team. But Oklahoma State, I think, ultimately has the best chance. Now, unfortunately, they will not have Dayton Fix this year because he's taking that Olympic red shirt. But they still do have Gefeller, JoJo Smith, Dakota Gear, who are all top-ranked guys. And I think that's why Oklahoma State's going to win the Big 12. Talking about the Big 10, this is possibly the most exciting conference to watch this year. And the most exciting because we don't know who's going to win it. Of course, we don't know who's going to win any of these conferences, but I think Big 10 is the biggest toss-up. And get ready because I may shock you. I may blow some minds today. So, Penn State won it last year, of course, but Ohio State actually won it in 2018 and 2017. The last time Iowa won it was in 2015. Now, Penn State has won the last 5 out of 10 Big Ten titles. So they're only 50%. And that's why I think Iowa's going to win it this year, okay? Call me crazy. Call me crazy. I don't think a lot of people will, but I think Iowa is going to win the Big Ten this year. Of course, you're going to have Michigan in the hunt, Wisconsin, Ohio State, and Penn State all looking for that. I think that Penn State could win the national tournament, and Iowa wins the Big Ten tournament. Just my prediction. Talking EIWA. EIWA, last year, Lehigh won the EIWA. They actually won the last two titles. Now, Cornell is a top team in the EIWA that they're going to do very well this year. However, they have a lot of guys who are redshirting. They still have a few guys who are going to do well for the team, such as heavyweight Brendan Furman, who I hold a lot of faith in for Cornell. However, with guys like Yanni taking that Olympic redshirt year, Vito, it's just going to be a little bit of a down year for the team. We'll see. But who is in the hunt? Lehigh, of course, with Jordan Wood and Cutler. Army is a team that's in the hunt with a guy like Ben Harvey at 174. But who's going to win it? I think right now, Lehigh is ranked number 12, but I think they're going to be number 1 in the IWA. 3 more conferences for you. MAC, Missouri, who I said was in the Big 12 before, won the Big 12 a couple years ago. Missouri is number 8 right now in the country as a team. They are seeking their 7th straight MAC title. And what I think is an exciting thing is, of course, the MAC is merged with the EWL. So we could see MAC and EWL champs teams going against each other. So, of course, Lock Haven won the EWL last year, coming off as 2-time EWL champs. Now, who do you think that Lock Haven has a chance this year? I think so. With they're losing Chance Marsteller, they're losing a couple guys, but they still have Kyle Shoup at 141. Mizzou, of course, is Brock Mahler leading the way, and that's why I think that Mizzou just is a couple more studs, a couple more of a solid lineup than Lock Haven, but I think they're going to win the MAC this year. At the Pac-12, last year Stanford won it, and Stanford has a bunch of good guys this year, such as freshman Will Woods, Townsville, as well as Shane Griffith. But Arizona State, who I think is the other top-tier team who has a shot to win the Pac-12, Arizona State, of course, won it in 2018, 2017. I think they just have a couple more studs in their lineup with guys like the Valencia, Zahid and Anthony Valencia, with Shields, with Maruka. I think that they just have a solid team all around and don't really stand a chance of losing the Pac-12. But we'll see if Stanford can pull it off. I always love to see an upset. And finally, the SoCon, the team that won it last year is Campbell University. Campbell University won it last year, and they won it in 2017 as well. This is going to be a battle between Campbell and App State. But what I think is interesting is right now, there are 8 guys ranked from the SoCon in the top 25. And 5 of those 8 are from Campbell. 5 of those 8 are from Campbell. I think the other 3 are from App State. So that's why I think these 2 are going to be the toughest. But we also have Chattanooga. Chattanooga is going to be another team in contention. But I think that Campbell just has a great lineup all around. And another thing that I want to mention is that they actually won the preseason poll. They were voted to win the SoCon title in 2020. So, of course, again, these are my predictions. Please let me know in the comments below, who do you think is going to win each conference this year? Talking next, it's time to talk about the NCAA team race outlook. Who is going to win an NCAA title? Can Penn State win another title, or is Iowa or somebody else going to come in and sweep that from them? Now, this is actually a question coming from one of the Fanco Wrestling fans, and Brian Bourne, who wrote in, he said, can you please do a YouTube video predicting for NCAA team title for the upcoming 2020 season? Thanks, and love your channel. I really appreciate that, Brian Bourne. Brian Bourne, of course, submitted that question by email. Email is the best way. You can submit a question in the link below on FancoWrestling.com. That is the best way to get your questions read on this show. Now, will Penn State win another title, or will somebody else take it from them? I believe that there are 5 schools right now, 5 schools that could win an NCAA title. What are those 5 schools? Well, I'm going to show you. First up, Wisconsin. We could see Ohio State, Oklahoma State, Penn State, or Iowa. Now, first thing I want to say, and I think it's important to say for every single video, but I want to say is that just because I'm mentioning these 5 teams does not mean that one of these teams is 100% going to win. Any team, I believe, out there has a shot. You could see things out there. These are just going off of stats, going off of guys that are ranked right now. And just my prediction. As a fan, as a wrestling fan, these are my predictions as teams that could win this year. So what is the outlook? Well, talking first about Wisconsin. Right now, Wisconsin has 5 guys that are ranked in the top 25. They have a potential to have, I believe, 1 to 2 national champions, or a couple of finalists at least. And I believe they have a potential to have 3 or more All-Americans, which is a solid year for Wisconsin. Now, I think that they definitely have guys who could be All-Americans who aren't necessarily in that top 25 right now, but right now, looking at their number 1 guy right now is Seth Gross, transferring in from South Dakota State. Seth Gross, a massive pickup for the Badgers. Now, they also have Evan Wick at who's number 3 in the country at 165. He had a great season last year, just couldn't pick up a couple of those victories. And then at heavyweight, number 6 in Trent Hilger. I think these are all guys who are going to be looking for titles this year for the Badgers. Now, the next team that I want to talk about is Ohio State. Ohio State has been a team that's been in contention the last couple of years. And I think that there's a very good shot that they are going to do well this year. Again, their last title was in 2015. And one thing I want to mention is that Wisconsin, the team I just mentioned, they've actually never won a title as a team. They've never won a national team title. Ohio State has. The last time they won, the only time they won is 2015. Right now, they have 9 guys ranked in the top 25. I think that they have a potential to have 5 to 7 All-Americans this year, with 4 guys right now ranked in the top 10. One of those guys, of course, is number 1, Colin Moore. Colin Moore has had a rough national tournament the last couple of years, but I think has a very strong shot, a leading shot to get that national title this year. Number 5 is Sammy Sasso. Sasso at 149 is a lot of guys' predictions to win this year as a freshman. And then number 3 in Luke Pletcher is moving up from 33 to 41. I think all 3 of those guys have a shot to make the finals and possibly win it. But definitely, I think, All-American. Now, next up on the list, Oklahoma State. And I think that I'm almost listing a couple of these in order as far as who I think is going to win. I'll give my exact prediction at the end, but I think that Ohio State just has a couple more guys than Wisconsin, and that's kind of why I'm putting them over them for right now to place. Next up is Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State and Ohio State, I think, are going to have a very tight team race competition. Now, Ohio State does have a couple more ranked guys than Oklahoma State, and I think Oklahoma State is going to have a tough time without Dayton Fix. Of course, Dayton Fix last year, he made the finals and could have won. Could have won this year. I think we definitely see Fix win a title in the upcoming years, but it's going to be tough without him. But they do have Nick Piccinini at 125, who's a great point scorer, as well as Gefeller, JoJo Smith, and Dakota Gear. Now, Oklahoma State has some top guys. I don't necessarily know that all of them are pinners. And that's kind of what Ohio State's problem has been in the past, is that they don't always have guys who show up to pin or tack. Yes, they do have that happen, but like a guy looking at Pletcher who usually gets the job done, he usually wins, but he doesn't always win big. And that's kind of where Penn State's run away with it in the past, is because of bonus points. Now, of course, they're losing Jason Nolf. They're losing Bo Nickel, so that's going to be tough for them. But I think they have a chance to have definitely a couple of maybe a finalist or two. That's Oklahoma State. Now, they have 33 total titles, and the last time they won it was actually in 2006. So could they win again in 2019? Leave your comment below. Who is going to win the national tournament this year? And the top two teams that I think have a very strong chance of winning this year are Penn State and Iowa. Iowa is a team that everybody's talking about. Why? Because they have most of their lineup that is returning. most of their All-American, I think all of their All-Americans last year, I believe it's seven All-Americans from the past couple of years are returning to their lineup. Guys like Spencer Lee, Alex Marinelli, Caleb Young, Michael Kemmer, Austin DeSanto, who are all ranked right now in the top 3. Every single one of those guys I mentioned is ranked in the top 3. I think Iowa has a chance to, right now they have 10 ranked guys in the top 25. I think they have a chance to have 10 All-Americans, definitely in that 8 to 10 range, and that seems crazy, but absolutely possible with the possibility of 4 to 5 champs. So if Iowa had 5 champs, that would be outrageous. If they had 5 champs, that would be outrageous. Now, the last title they won was in 2010, and they have 23 total titles. And the other team, the last team that I want to talk about, of course, is Penn State. 8 ranked guys right now in the top 25. I think they've, again, have 4 to 5 guys that could make the finals, could win. Now, we're not going to see all, like 5-5, Iowa and Penn State. Well, I say that now. It's probably not going to happen, but just my prediction. With a potential of 8 All-Americans. I don't think they're going to get 10 All-Americans like Iowa could, but we could see Penn State do that. Now, like I said, Penn State has a very strong attempt. They do very well at getting bonus points. With a couple guys that are leaving this past year, and Nolf and Nickel, who are the 2 top bonus point scorers in the entire country, it's going to be tough for them this year. Their last title, of course, was last year. They had 9 total titles. 8 out of the last 9 years they won, and then another one back in the old days. But could Penn State win it this year? Could Iowa win it? My prediction, as it stands right now, is that Penn State wins the national title. Iowa gets the Big Ten title. We'll see what happens. We'll see, what happens throughout the season. But that is just my prediction as far as who is going to win it this year. The final rankings, my final rankings: Penn State number 1, Iowa number 2, Ohio State number 3, Michigan 4, and Oklahoma State number 5. Actually, excuse me, I'm taking Michigan out. I had them in there before all their Olympic red shirts. Oklahoma State at 4 and Wisconsin at 5. So Penn State, Iowa, Ohio State, Okie State, and Wisconsin. And one of the things that most of you guys were looking forward to is who will win the NCAAs this year, as far as you thought. I don't want to see right now. Make sure you are leaving your comments for live questions at the end of the show. I am seeing them, and I will be talking all about that at the end of the show. But the first, we want to talk about who will win the NCAAs this year. So, Fanco Wrestling, I put out a poll this week to see who the community thought were going to win the national tournament at every single weight, as well as every single conference. And I was just interested to see what all you had to say, because of course I can give my opinion, but that's only so much fun. So who's going to win it this year? First thing I want to talk about is I'm going to put up these results and discuss them. So at 125 pounds, these are your predictions for the 2020 NCAA Wrestling Champions, as voted on by the Fanco Wrestling fans, by the Fanco Wrestling community. I want to thank you all for being a part of this community and for talking about who's going to win it. So, at 125 pounds, a big runaway here was Spencer Lee with 83% of the vote. We also had Seabass at number 2, Jack Mueller at number 3, and Nick Piccinini at number 4, which it actually surprised me that Pitch wasn't a little bit higher. I think that this is Pitch's year. Now, of course, we've seen him beat Spencer Lee in the past. Could happen again this year. We've seen Seabass beat Spencer Lee in the past, twice last year, actually. And then Jack Mueller was undefeated going up until the national finals against Spencer Lee. So those 4 are going to be very exciting to watch. At 133, you voted Spencer Lee, or Seth Gross, but only with 50% of the vote. Now, of course, that is a majority, but only 50% of the vote. So who else do we have? We have Austin DeSanto, as well as Dayton Fix. Now, Dayton Fix originally was in this poll until he announced his Olympic red shirt. Excuse me. Until he announced his Olympic red shirt. So, that could change things. That could have changed the way people perceive things, but I just want to mention that. And then is Roman Bravo Young. So I'm interested to see where those votes would have went if those people didn't vote for, if you didn't vote for Dayton if you voted for Dayton Fix, and who would you have voted for next? 41, the top two here were Nick Lee and Dom Demas actually came in second. At 149, Austin O'Connor with the majority of the vote, but not a massive majority. The second most, which almost won, it was Sammy Sasso, who is the freshman coming in this year, and followed by Pat Lugo and Brock Mahler, both with around 12 to 14% of the vote. Sasso had 27%, so just a little bit behind O'Connor, but O'Connor, of course, right now is ranked number 1. Sasso number 5. At 157, Hidley was 63% of the vote. Next up with Deacon and Caleb Young. I think Hidley has the best shot and could very well happen at 165. It was almost an even split. It wasn't quite 50-50, but it was 43 to 43 or 43.7, something like that. Vincenzo Joseph over Alex Marinelli. So you guys, you are very divisive on who's going to win at 165. At 174, Mark Hall won the vote with 81%, but Michael Kemmer's coming in second, and then Miles Amin, another guy who, before I put this out, or after I put it out, announced his Olympic redshirt year, so of course he's not going to be in those top results. At 184, the guy who you guys think is most 100% going to win, almost 100% of the vote, 91% actually, is Zahid Valencia, with 2% of that vote going to Ben Darmstadt. And what I'd love to see is that it's not 100%, all these votes, and that just means there's some excitement in the wrestling world. There are a lot of wrestling fans who don't think that these guys on this list are going to win. And I think that just shows that there's more excitement, that we're cheering for all our top guys. And this is who, just because we say this is who we think is going to win, doesn't mean that these guys are definitely going to win. Now, 197, of course, we have Colin Moore with 47% of the vote, but with 32%, it was actually Kyle Connell out of Penn State. And at 285, another very close matchup. Kassar with 50% of the vote, and Stevenson with 41% of the vote. I'm excited to see what happened. But who do you think is going to win the team championship? Let's talk about the team championship. You think that Penn State is going to win the team championship. Did you vote for Penn State, or did you vote for Iowa or somebody else? Because Penn State has 48% of the vote, while Iowa has 43%, followed by Ohio State and Oklahoma State. So pretty close to what my predictions were, but you thought that Penn State was going to win. Now, as far as conferences, you had NC State winning ACCs, OK State winning Big 12s, Big 10s. Do you think Penn State's going to win? Although I think it's going to be tight race with Iowa. 51% Penn State, 38% Iowa. The IWA. Most of you thought that Cornell was going to win this upcoming IWA Conference Championship. I have to disagree. I think that Lehigh's going to win, but I'm excited to see how Cornell does. I'd love to see Cornell win it. I'm just excited to watch good wrestling. As far as MAC, you think that Mizzou's going to win, but Lock Haven did come in second place in the poll. Pac-12s, ASU coming in hot, and then SoCon, Campbell with App State followed behind with 26% of the vote. And that is who you thought, in the Fanco Wrestling community, who you thought is going to win the NCAA Wrestling Championships. Now, it's time to talk about some live questions. Make sure that you are leaving your questions in the comments so we can talk all about that. So, let's talk about some live viewer questions. One of the first questions, I'm pulling these. Yes, I am pulling these from. Excuse me. I am. Now, it's time to talk about some live questions. Make sure that you are leaving your questions in. Gotta mute that, excuse me. But we are talking live questions. And I'm going to take a couple questions from Instagram first. And first thing I want to mention is which wrestler, who are you most excited to watch this year? Who is your favorite wrestler that you're most excited to watch this year? The guy I'm most excited to watch, that's a tough one. That comes from Nick DeLessio 51 from Instagram. I think I'm most excited to watch Hayden Hidley, to be honest. Yeah, yes, I'm excited to watch. The teams that I'm most excited to watch, because I'm working at Campbell now, I am very excited to watch all these Campbell wrestlers. I think they have a very strong potential. A lot of great guys coming in this season. I think are going to shock the wrestling community just coming in. And I'm excited to see guys like that. But I'm also excited to see guys like from Penn State, who, yes, is my favorite team. I can't wait to see how they do. But Hidley, I think, is a guy who's just kind of been overshadowed by Nolf in the past. I don't think that overshadow is necessarily the right word because he had some exciting seasons, some great seasons. But now moving down to North Carolina, I love NC State too. I think they're one of my favorite schools to watch wrestle. And I'm interested to see how they do. Coming from Zixter21, can Arizona State make a run for national championships? Yeah, I think they can. Like I kind of mentioned, Zahid Valencia is going to be leading that team. He's a guy who can score a lot of bonus points. He has scored a lot of bonus points in the past, and I think it's very possible that he does. But of course, that will help the team win. But you got Anthony Valencia, his brother. You have Josh Shields, Josh Maruka. You have the heavyweight as well. You just have a lot of good, solid guys. Now, in the past, unfortunately, Arizona State just hasn't always converted at the national tournament, and which has been a little bit upsetting. Upsetting to see because I love seeing where Arizona State goes, but that's just my thoughts on the matter. Going over to some YouTube questions, talking about Al Carroll, just want to say hey from Seattle. What's up, Al Carroll? Hello from Raleigh, North Carolina. I want to say hey. BJ Kyle says some of his dream matchups. I want to see Stevenson versus Kassar. I want to see Valencia win another title against Mark Hall. You could see a Valencia versus Mark Hall matchup depending on how Anthony does this year, and it's very possible that that matchup does happen. Wrestler is talking about, do you think Gable Stevenson beats Anthony Kassar? That question comes from AJ D'Agostino. AJ, I want to talk about your question. Stevenson versus Kassar, very possible that match happens. Probably versus the Minnesota Penn State duel, but who is going to win? I think that next time Stevenson comes out with the victory. We've seen 2 4-3 matches in the past, and they've been close. A couple of takedowns, couple of roughing, hands to the face calls, some discussing a little bit, how they're going to do. I think it's very possible that Stevenson beats him in the duel. However, talking about Big Tens and Nationals when it really matters, I think Kassar comes away with the victory. Just my prediction. Next up is Bilbo Baggins says, my bold prediction. If Encimita wrestles this year, he will win NCAA. Bold prediction. I love to hear it. AJ D'Agostino, what team do you think will win the NCAA title? Mention that. I think that, yes, Penn State is going to win that national title. I want to get to a couple of different questions. Another question I'm going to take from Instagram. How do you think RBY will do this season? That comes from AXX1. How do you think RBY will do this season? I think RBY does very, very well. I think in the past, he had a solid tournament, but with a lot of guys 133 taking that Olympic redshirt year, I think it's could be his time to shine. I think he has a good shot to shine. He's just going to have a couple guys in his way, like Seth Gross, like Austin DeSanto. They're two guys who aren't going to let up easy, and I'd love to see how he does. I think he's going to do well, though. Who do you think is going to be the next 4-timer? Coming from Nick DeLessio 51. Who's going to be the next 4-timer? The next 4-timer, in my opinion, is going to be Spencer Lee. Spencer Lee is going to be the next four-timer. Originally, I thought it was going to be Vincenzo Joseph. I thought Vincenzo and Spencer Lee were both going to become four-timers in the same year, which would have been next year. Of course, unfortunately, Vincenzo lost last year. But Spencer Lee did end up winning last year, two-time national champion. And I think he's going to win this year. And I think he's going to win next year. Excuse me, Vincenzo, this is his senior year, so he would have been a four-timer this year if he would have won. However, Spencer Lee, I think, is going to be the next four-timer. Now, I think that Nick Piccinini, Sebastian Rivera, and Jack Mueller have a couple of things to say about that. So it's not just going to be very easy for Lee, but I think last year proved that there is some challenge for Lee out there in the collegiate level, which I'm excited to see. Next question that I want to take is Gabe Osborne asks, the Spencer Lee versus Seth Gross super match, what's the score? Well, you know what? I'm going to check. I'm not sure if Iowa Hawkeyes schedule. I'm not sure if Iowa and Penn State wrestle this year. In Iowa and Wisconsin wrestle this year. Excuse me. I'm going to check on that right now. But as far as those two wrestling, if Spencer Lee bumps up to wrestle Gross, which we've seen Gross want those super matches in the past. Excuse me, they do wrestle. They do wrestle December 1st at Carver Hawkeye Arena. Who could win that super match? Well, I think that Spencer Lee wins that super match. I don't think he crushes Gross. I think that he scores a couple more takedowns on him. Now, Gross has some weight on him, which is going to, of course, hurt Lee if that match happens. But I think that, I think that Spencer Lee wins 6-3. 6-3 is my prediction for that super match. If it happens. We'll see if it happens. Next up, the next question I want to take is from Joe Rickley, who says, do you think Jack Mueller has a chance at 125? Yeah, Jack, I do think that he has a chance at 125. I think that a lot of these guys have a shot. I think 125 is not Spencer Lee's weight. Yes, he's won it the last 2 years. Yes, he's the reigning champ, but does Jack Mueller have a chance? Yeah, he came in undefeated last year to the national tournament. Pulled off a win against Sebastian Rivera, who has beat Lee in the past twice. I think that's almost like they call it, not a triangle, not a rectangle or square, but like a four-way where anybody can win it. Okay? A couple more bold predictions coming in. Talk about Jacob Camacho. Could he be an All-American from Go to Shift? Yeah, I think very possible. Brian Richko says PA stud and redshirt freshman Sammy Sasso will win a national title for Ohio State at 149. Yeah, I've been hearing a lot of that this year, that Sasso could be the guy at 149. Then Puffy Laser says Hayden for it all. Hayden for the national title this year. And guys, that's going to do it for this week's Fanco Wrestling Show. If you were a fan of this live stream, make sure that you let me know in the chat right now. Were you a fan of Fanco Wrestling Live this week? Will you be joining in the future? I want to see you guys all next week, and I'm looking forward to this upcoming wrestling season. See you then.